Driven into the muddy streets with nothing but her broken wheelchair, Amaka watched her husband celebrate his new wealth. Completely unaware, he had just partnered with the very empire she secretly owned. The rain did not just fall, it punished the earth. It lashed against the corrugated iron roofs of the neighborhood, a deafening drumbeat that drowned out the crickets and the distant rumble of Lagos traffic. Amaka lay in the thick, unforgiving red mud, the cold seeping through her thin cotton dress and chilling her to the bone. Beside her, the twisted metal wheels of her chair sank deeper into the earth, useless and broken. The scent of wet dust and rotting leaves filled the humid air, wrapping around her like a suffocating blanket. She dragged her lifeless legs slightly to the side, her calloused hands scraping against the rough asphalt of the driveway, tearing the skin, but she did not cry out. She had learned to take up as little space as possible. Through the glowing windows of the grand cement house she had helped build, the muffled sounds of clinking glasses and raucous laughter spilled into the night. It was a celebration of greed. Her husband, Obinna, was throwing a lavish party. The aroma of roasted meat and rich spices drifted out into the storm, a cruel reminder of the warmth and comfort she had just been violently expelled from. Tears rolled down her cheeks, mingling with the heavy raindrops, but they were not tears of defeat. They were tears of profound, quiet realization. Success reveals character. It does not change it. To understand how Amaka found herself discarded like trash in the mud, one must look back to a time before the silence, before the cruelty. 5 years ago, Amaka's life had been entirely different. She was not always bound to a chair. She had been a vibrant, brilliant young woman, the only daughter of a modest but brilliant software engineer. Her father had taught her the language of machines, the invisible codes that ran the modern world. But fate had other plans. A tragic collision on a dark highway had taken both her parents in an instant. The crushing weight of twisted metal had ended their lives, and Amaka had survived, but her spine had been irreparably damaged. She remembered the sterile smell of the hospital room, the blinding fluorescent lights, and the heavy, suffocating weight of grief. In his final moments, pinned beneath the wreckage, her father had pressed a small, blood-stained hard drive into her hands. He had coughed, his breath shallow, and spoken with a fierce urgency. Something about the way he said those words had pierced her deeply. He looked at her carefully and asked her to listen to the most important instruction of her life. "Hide this, my daughter," he had whispered. "It is the foundation of the future. Build it in silence. Trust no one with the core." The words left his lips so softly, yet they echoed loudly in her mind every day since. There was no taking it back now. She had honored his dying wish. From her hospital bed, grieving and paralyzed, Amaka had taken her father's raw code and built an impenetrable digital fortress. She founded a tech empire, hiding her identity behind proxy boards and international legal trusts. She named it Apex Global. She became the invisible architect of a billion-dollar syndicate. But a young woman in a wheelchair, holding a massive insurance payout from the transport company responsible for the crash, was a target. Enter Obinna. At the time, Obinna was a struggling junior clerk, a man with a smooth tongue and a charming smile. He had visited her in the hospital, bringing cheap flowers and empty promises. He pushed her wheelchair through the hospital gardens, whispering sweet declarations of eternal devotion. He swore he did not care about her legs. He swore he only saw her heart. Amaka, blinded by the fresh, agonizing loneliness of losing her family, believed him. They were married in a quiet ceremony. But the moment the insurance funds cleared into her account, the illusion shattered. Obinna convinced her to invest the entirety of her settlement into his new business venture, a consulting firm. She gave him the money, playing the role of the supportive, helpless wife. She wanted to see if his love was genuine before revealing the colossal truth of her hidden wealth. Days slowly turned into weeks, and weeks into months. As the business grew, fueled by her money, Obinna's patience for his disabled wife vanished. He stopped pushing her chair. He stopped eating dinner with her. He moved her into the small guest room at the back of the house, claiming her medical equipment ruined the aesthetic of the master bedroom. Then he brought his mother, Mama Nkechi, to live with them. Mama Nkechi was a woman whose heart was as hard as dried clay. She despised Amaka from the very first day. She saw the wheelchair not as a tragedy, but as a curse upon her son's household. She would stand in the doorway of the small back room, her arms crossed, shaking her head in utter disgust. As the weeks went by, Amaka settled into a rhythm of silent endurance. She watched Obinna wear expensive silk suits and drive luxury vehicles purchased with her parents' blood money. She watched him parade around town, building a reputation as a self-made corporate giant, and all the while, she sat in the back room, typing quietly on a battered old laptop, managing the unseen empire of Apex Global, waiting and watching. Then came the inciting incident. The storm was coming. For 6 months, Obinna had been aggressively pursuing a partnership with a massive international tech conglomerate. He needed their software licensing to secure a government contract that would make him undeniably rich. That conglomerate was Apex Global. Amaka had watched his frantic emails come through her secure servers. She had read his desperate proposals, and in a calculated move of ultimate testing, she had instructed her board of directors to approve his contract. She wanted to see what he would do when he finally tasted supreme power. Earlier that evening, the confirmation email had arrived. Obinna's firm had been granted the multi-million-dollar partnership. The house erupted into celebration. Mama Nkechi had hired caterers, inviting the neighborhood elite to witness her son's triumph. Amaka had remained in her back room, listening to the clinking of champagne glasses. But Obinna was not satisfied with just celebrating. His new status required a new image. A crippled wife hidden in the back room was a liability. Late into the night, long after the guests had left and the storm outside had begun to rage, the door to Amaka's room burst open. Obinna stood there, smelling of expensive liquor and arrogance. Beside him stood Mama Nkechi, her face twisted in a sneer of pure disgust. And behind them, standing near the hallway, was Chioma, the daughter of a wealthy local politician. Chioma wore a tight red dress and a diamond necklace. She was to be Obinna's new trophy. Something about the way Mama Nkechi looked at the wheelchair had pierced Amaka deeply. The older woman stepped forward, her voice carrying the harsh, grating tone of absolute malice. "Look at this useless thing," Mama Nkechi said. "My son is now a partner to the greatest company in the world. He will be dining with kings. And you expect him to push a broken cripple around? You are a curse, a parasite." The words dropped like a stone. Amaka did not flinch. She simply looked at her husband, waiting for him to defend her, waiting for a shred of humanity. Obinna stepped forward, his eyes cold and empty. He looked at her carefully and spoke the words that would seal his fate. "My mother is right, Amaka. I have outgrown you. I am a millionaire now. I need a wife who can stand by my side at corporate galas, not someone I have to carry to the bathroom. Chioma is my future. You are just a mistake I made out of pity." The words hit her like a slap across the face. Yet a strange calm washed over her. There was no taking it back now. The test was over. He had failed spectacularly. Before Amaka could say a single word, Obinna grabbed the handles of her wheelchair. He did not wheel her gently. He yanked the chair backward with such violent force that one of the wheels buckled under the doorframe. Amaka gripped the armrests, her heart beating faster as he dragged her down the hallway, through the grand living room, and toward the heavy oak front doors. "Obinna, what are you doing?" she asked, her voice steady despite the sheer terror of his physical aggression. "I am taking out the trash," he spat. Mama Nkechi opened the front doors, letting the furious wind and rain sweep into the foyer. Obinna shoved the wheelchair out onto the porch. The broken wheel caught on the concrete step, pitching the chair violently to the side. Amaka was thrown from the seat, tumbling down the short flight of stairs and landing heavily in the thick red mud of the driveway. The wheelchair tumbled after her, its metal frame bending and snapping in the rain. "Do not ever come back here," Obinna shouted over the roar of the thunder. "I am divorcing you. Go and beg on the streets where you belong." The heavy oak doors slammed shut, the sound echoing like a gunshot in the night. The lock clicked into place. And so, Amaka was left alone in the storm. The cold rain battered her fragile body, washing the mud over her torn dress and bare feet. Her hands trembled as she pushed herself up slightly, leaning against the ruined frame of her wheelchair. Any other woman would have screamed. Any other woman would have banged on the doors, begging for mercy. But beneath her calm exterior, a quiet strength held her together. She wiped the wet earth from her face. She looked up at the glowing windows of the mansion, listening to the muffled sound of Chioma laughing inside. Little did they know, this act of supreme cruelty had just triggered their absolute destruction. They had just thrown out the architect of their new fortune. The contract Obinna had signed was built on conditions he could never fulfill without her silent protection. He thought he had conquered the mountain, completely unaware he was standing on a trapdoor, and she held the lever. She lay in the mud, shivering, vulnerable, but possessing a power that none of them could comprehend. The storm raged on, but the true storm had not yet begun. It was brewing in the heart of the crippled woman in the mud. Days slowly turned into weeks, and soon the world would learn that success reveals character, but vengeance restores dignity. The next morning, Amaka woke before the sun, though she had not truly slept. She had dragged herself through the torrential downpour, her arms burning with an agony she had never known, pulling her ruined body away from the grand gates of her former life. A passing vegetable trader, a weary woman with a wooden cart, had taken pity on her near dawn, loading her broken wheelchair and her shivering body onto the back of the wagon. The trader had carried her to the very edge of the city, to a sprawling, forgotten settlement where the forgotten people of Lagos lived and died in silence. Amaka found shelter in a dilapidated cement house. It was a structure of 4 crumbling walls, a rusted, corrugated iron roof let in the rain, trapping the blistering heat. The floor was bare red earth, permanently damp and smelling of old ash and sorrow. There was no door, only a faded piece of fabric hanging from the frame, fluttering weakly in the polluted breeze. She had nothing. Her bank accounts, her phones, her identification, everything was locked inside Obinna's mansion, left behind in the violent suddenness of her expulsion. To the world, she was just another nameless casualty of poverty. She was a crippled woman with a torn dress and bare feet, taking up space in a world that despised weakness. But what nobody could see was the quiet strength that held her together. She could have walked into any bank, verified her biometrics, and frozen Obinna's world in an instant. She could have called her overseas lawyers and summoned a fleet of black luxury vehicles to rescue her. But Amaka was a strategist. A chess player does not flip the board over a lost pawn. They wait until the opponent's king is entirely surrounded. Obinna had signed the preliminary partnership contracts. The binding legal integration would take exactly 3 months. These clauses would completely merge his personal assets with Apex Global. If she struck now, he would lose a deal. If she waited 3 months, he would lose everything he had ever owned, down to the shirts in his closet. And so, as the weeks went by, Amaka embraced her suffering. She settled into a rhythm of brutal, unforgiving labor. To afford a single meal a day, she took a job at the local open-air market, working for a massive, loud-mouthed woman who sold processed root vegetables. Amaka's job was to peel cassava. By midday, the burning sun would beat down upon the dusty road, baking the air until it shimmered with heat. The scent of frying onions from nearby food stalls mixed with the heavy, sour smell of fermenting cassava and open gutters. Amaka would sit on a cracked plastic bucket, her broken wheelchair leaning uselessly against the crumbling market wall. For 10 hours a day she gripped a blunt, rusted knife, dragging it violently against the thick, rough bark of the heavy tubers. The physical toll was immense. The rough skin of the cassava tore at her cuticles until they bled sluggishly, the bright red drops mixing with the chalky white starch that coated her hands and arms. Her calloused hands cramped and locked. Her shoulders burned from the effort of sitting unsupported without her specialized medical chair. Her back screamed in constant throbbing agony. Dust coated her eyelashes and hair. The chaotic noise of the market pounded against her skull. Shouting hawkers, blaring horns of tricycles, and crying children filled the air. Yet she never complained. She peeled one tuber, then another, then another. She built a mountain of white flesh, earning just enough crumpled naira notes to buy a cup of water and a handful of roasted peanuts. During these endless hours of agonizing labor, Amaka's mind would drift into deep reflection. She thought about the nature of power and the frailty of human loyalty. She remembered the way Obinna had looked at her in the hospital, his eyes wide with a perfectly practiced imitation of love. She remembered the promises he had made, swearing that her disability meant nothing to him. Those promises had dissolved so easily. He had tasted the intoxicating flavor of a multi-million-dollar deal. He had believed that money elevated him above the basic requirements of human decency. He believed that because she could not walk, she could not fight back. A lump formed in her throat as she remembered the sheer cruelty of Mama Nkechi. The older woman had sneered at her ruined legs. They had thrown her out not just to be rid of her, but to humiliate her. They wanted to break her spirit so completely that she would never dare to show her face again. But they had miscalculated. The fire in Amaka's soul had not been extinguished by the rain, it had been tempered. Every slice of the knife against the cassava, every drop of blood on her fingers, every pang of hunger in her empty stomach was a down payment on her vengeance. She was invisible, but in a good way. She was the ghost in the machine, watching the clock tick down to their absolute ruin. Months passed, and the season changed, but Amaka's circumstances did not. The harsh dry season rolled in, bringing choking dust winds that swept through the slums. It was during one of these relentless, suffocating afternoons that she noticed him. He was an old man, impossibly thin, sitting on the dusty ground just a few feet away from her mountain of cassava peelings. He wore clothes that were little more than rags tied together with twine. They were stained with months of dirt and despair. His hair was matted, his face covered in a thick layer of gray dust, and his eyes were completely white, clouded over by the thick cataracts of absolute blindness. He held a small, chipped wooden bowl in his trembling, skeletal hands. He did not speak. He did not beg loudly like the others in the market. He simply sat there, a silent monument to the city's neglect, swaying slightly in the oppressive heat. For 3 days, Amaka watched him. The crowds of the market flowed around him like water around a stone. They ignored him completely, occasionally kicking up dust into his face or stepping on his bare, swollen feet. Not a single person dropped a coin into his bowl. Not a single person offered him a drop of water. On the 4th day, the heat was unbearable. Amaka's own hunger was a sharp, tearing pain in her abdomen. She had worked for 14 hours the previous day. She finally earned enough to buy a small, hot portion. She bought cooked cassava porridge and a tiny piece of dried fish. It was her first hot meal in weeks. She held the small plastic bowl in her trembling hands, feeling the glorious warmth radiating into her palms. The aroma was intoxicating. Her mouth watered, and her empty stomach lurched with desperate anticipation. But as she raised the food to her lips, she looked over at the blind beggar. He had collapsed against the crumbling wall, his head hanging limply against his chest. His breathing was shallow, his chipped wooden bowl lying empty in the dirt. He was dying. Amaka paused. She looked at her food. It was her single source of energy, the only thing allowing her to survive another day of brutal labor. Then she looked at the dying old man. She knew the feeling of dying in the dirt. Meanwhile, the world celebrated and feasted just a few miles away. She pushed herself off her cracked bucket. She dragged her useless legs through the dust until she was sitting beside him. Something about the fragile, broken state of the old man pierced her deeply. She looked at his trembling hands, feeling a profound surge of shared humanity, and she spoke the first gentle words she had uttered in months. "Take this, Baba. Please, you must eat. It is not much, but it will warm your stomach." The words left her lips so softly, carrying the full weight of her absolute selflessness. She took his dirty, trembling hands. She guided them to the warm plastic bowl, pressing the entirety of her meal into his grasp. There was no hesitation in her heart. The old man's fingers gripped the bowl weakly. He ate slowly at first, then, with desperate, tearing urgency, he consumed the porridge and the fish until the bowl was completely clean. Amaka sat beside him, ignoring the burning hunger in her own body, feeling a strange, quiet peace wash over her. True wealth is measured not in gold, but in the kindness we show to strangers. When he had finished, the blind beggar turned his face toward her. His milky white eyes seemed to stare right through her. He was not looking at her ruined dress or her crippled legs. He was looking directly into her soul. He reached out, his dusty fingers lightly brushing against her calloused hand. "The world sees a broken branch," the old beggar whispered. His voice was surprisingly deep and steady, devoid of the frailty his body suggested. "But the lion only sleeps, my queen. It does not die. It only waits for the tall grass to part." The words dropped like a stone into the quiet space between them. Amaka's heart began beating faster. She stared at the blind man, a chill running down her spine, despite the blistering heat of the afternoon sun. It was an impossible phrase. It was the exact phrase her father used to say. He told her this when she was a little girl. It was the secret code phrase they had used when designing the foundational architecture of Apex Global. Before she could ask him how he knew those words, a loud commotion erupted at the edge of the market, shattering the moment. The beggar bowed his head, retreating instantly into the persona of a mindless, babbling vagrant. His trembling hands pulled his rags tight around his thin shoulders. Amaka was left stunned, her mind racing. Neither of them knew that this was only the beginning of the storm. The loud commotion at the market edge grew louder. A massive, gleaming black luxury vehicle rolled down the dusty road. It was a car designed for kings. It did not belong in this slum. The heavy tires crushed discarded fruit and plastic bottles. It aimed directly for a deep puddle of stagnant, muddy water. Amaka sat on her bucket, peeling cassava. The car did not slow down. It sped up, hitting the puddle with tremendous force. A thick wave of foul brown water splashed into the air. It rained down entirely on Amaka and the blind beggar. Her face, her torn dress, and her peeled cassava were ruined. The car stopped a few yards away. The tinted window rolled down slowly. Chioma leaned out, wearing designer sunglasses and a mocking smile. Obinna sat in the driver's seat, looking completely indifferent. "Look at this pathetic sight," Chioma sneered. Her voice carried clearly over the noise of the market. A crippled beggar and a blind rat. Amaka wiped the foul water from her eyes. She looked at her husband. He refused to meet her gaze. "You should have driven faster, Obinna," Chioma laughed. "Her fat, broken body is ruining the view." "Let us leave, my love," Obinna finally said. "The smell of failure is making me sick." The luxury vehicle sped away, leaving a cloud of thick dust. Tears rolled down her cheeks. They were tears of profound humiliation. The words hit her like a slap across the face. But beneath her calm exterior, a storm was brewing. She closed her eyes, engaging in a deep internal reflection. She thought about the arrogance of new money. She remembered how Obinna used to beg her for small loans. Now, he wore silk suits and mocked her pain. He felt powerful, completely unaware of the digital trap closing around him. Success reveals character. It does not change it. She picked up her rusted knife. She began peeling a new cassava root. The blind beggar sat quietly, his milky eyes staring at the departing car. Neither of them knew that this was only the beginning. Weeks turned into months. The season grew hotter and more unforgiving. The first installment of the Apex Global funding hit Obinna's accounts. He was now officially a multimillionaire. He decided to expand his empire. He purchased the land where the slums sat. He planned to build a massive manufacturing plant. One particular afternoon, the ground began to shake. Heavy bulldozers arrived at the edge of the settlement. Behind them, a convoy of black jeeps rolled in. Mama Nkechi stepped out of the lead vehicle. She was dressed in expensive, imported lace and heavy gold jewelry. She was flanked by tall, muscular men carrying thick wooden clubs. They were hired thugs, paid to clear out the poor. Mama Nkechi marched directly toward Amaka's dilapidated cement house. Amaka was inside, boiling a small pot of cassava on a kerosene stove. The blind beggar sat near the doorway, silent and still. "Get out," Mama Nkechi screamed, her voice shrill and full of venom. "This land belongs to my son now." Amaka dragged herself to the doorway, her hands covered in ash. She looked up at the cruel older woman. "We have nowhere else to go," Amaka said quietly. Something about her calm voice infuriated Mama Nkechi. The older woman stepped forward and kicked the boiling pot. The hot water and cassava spilled across the red earth. The precious food, bought with hours of bloody labor, was ruined. "You are a parasite," Mama Nkechi spat, pointing a manicured finger. "You dragged my son down with your broken legs. Now you are trying to infect his land." She turned to the thugs. "Tear this filthy place down." The men stepped forward, swinging their heavy clubs. They smashed the crumbling walls. They ripped the rusted corrugated iron roof from its wooden beams. Amaka shielded her head, coughing as a thick cloud of dust engulfed her. Her heart began beating faster. She watched her only shelter being reduced to rubble. The blind beggar remained motionless in the shadows. He was listening intently, memorizing every cruel word. Mama Nkechi looked down at Amaka with pure disgust. "If I see your ugly face on this land tomorrow, I will bury you." She turned and walked back to her air-conditioned jeep. The convoy drove away, leaving Amaka sitting in the ruins. The words dropped like a stone into her shattered world. Amaka sat in the dust, her breathing heavy and ragged. She began a long, painful, internal monologue. She questioned the cruelty of human destiny. Why did the wicked prosper while the innocent suffered? She remembered her father's gentle voice. He had told her that the tallest trees faced the strongest winds. She realized that this pain was necessary. It was the final purification of her resolve. She would not let them break her. She looked at the blind beggar. He slowly reached out and touched her trembling shoulder. "The storm is here, my queen," he whispered. Little did she know, the ultimate test was still to come. As the weeks went by, the city buzzed with excitement. Obinna was hosting the corporate event of the decade. It was his official engagement party to Shioma. It was also the final contract signing with Apex Global. The event was held at the most luxurious five-star hotel in Lagos. The grand ballroom was decorated with imported crystal chandeliers. Thousands of white roses filled the air with a sickeningly sweet perfume. But Mama Nkechi was not satisfied with mere victory. She wanted absolute, crushing domination over her past. She wanted to destroy Amaka's spirit permanently. The day before the grand event, a black van arrived at the ruins. Two large men stepped out and approached Amaka. They did not speak. They grabbed her by the arms, dragging her across the dirt. They threw her violently into the back of the dark van. The blind beggar listened as the engine roared to life. He pulled a small, sleek satellite phone from his rags. He dialed a secure, encrypted number. "It is time," he said, his voice completely clear and authoritative. "Initiate the final phase." Meanwhile, Amaka lay in the darkness of the moving van. She was terrified, but her mind remained sharp. She knew the 3-month waiting period was over today. The trap was fully armed. The van stopped, and the doors swung open. She was dragged into the back entrance of the Grand Hotel. They threw her onto the cold marble floor of a utility room. Mama Nkechi stood over her, holding a filthy janitor's uniform. "Put this on," the older woman commanded, tossing the rags at Amaka. "Tonight you will clean the floors at my son's feet. You will serve his new bride. You will show all our wealthy guests your true place." Amaka changed into the filthy janitor uniform. Her scarred hands trembled violently in the cold room. Mama Nkechi dragged Amaka's old broken wheelchair inside. The older woman lifted Amaka into the ruined seat. The heavy doors to the grand ballroom swung open. A massive wall of noise washed over her completely. The room was filled with the city's richest elite. Women wore sparkling diamond necklaces and imported silk dresses. Men wore tailored suits and heavy gold watches. The scent of expensive French perfume filled the air. It mixed with the rich aroma of roasted meat. Amaka held a small wooden brush and a dustpan. Mama Nkechi pushed the broken wheelchair violently forward. It squeaked loudly against the polished marble floor. The joyful music slowly died down to a whisper. Hundreds of curious eyes turned to look at her. Cruel whispers erupted across the massive, brightly lit room. People pointed at her dirty, heavily calloused hands. They pointed at her ruined, lifeless legs. Obinna stood on a raised stage at the front. Chioma stood beside him, glowing with absolute triumph. "Attention, honored guests," Obinna announced clearly into a microphone. His arrogant voice echoed off the high, painted walls. "Please do not mind our new cleaning staff." The crowd erupted into cruel, mocking laughter. Chioma walked down the velvet steps of the stage. She held a tall glass of expensive red wine. She stopped right in front of Amaka's broken chair. "You missed a spot, cripple," Chioma sneered loudly. She tilted her elegant glass, pouring the wine out. The dark red liquid splashed onto the white marble. It splashed heavily onto Amaka's bare, scarred feet. "Clean it up," Chioma commanded with a sharp voice. "Use your bare hands if you have to." Amaka looked at the dark stain on the floor. She looked up at the woman who stole everything. Tears rolled down her cheeks in absolute silence. She gripped the small wooden brush very tightly. She leaned forward, her damaged spine screaming in agony. She began to scrub the cold, hard stone floor. The wealthy crowd watched her like an entertaining show. They clapped and cheered for Chioma's undeniable cruelty. Amaka closed her eyes, seeking refuge in her mind. She began a deep, painful internal reflection. She thought about the true concept of human dignity. Money could buy silk suits and crystal chandeliers, but it could never buy a pure, honest heart. She remembered her father's face before the tragic crash. He had taught her to be incredibly brave. He had told her to endure the darkest nights. The warm sun would always rise again without fail. She focused on the steady rhythm of her breathing. She scrubbed the floor, hiding her immense true power. Every humiliating laugh was a nail in their coffin. She was not a helpless victim in this room. She was a silent judge, gathering the final evidence. The 3-month integration period was completely finished. The digital trap was fully set and armed. She only needed to wait for the final guest. Suddenly, the massive golden doors at the back opened. Complete silence fell over the grand ballroom instantly. A man stepped proudly into the bright light. He wore a perfectly tailored Italian silk suit. He wore dark sunglasses, holding a long white cane. It was the blind beggar from the dusty slum. He did not look weak or frail anymore. He looked exactly like a powerful, untouchable king. 4 massive bodyguards in black suits followed him closely. Obinna rushed forward, extending a sweaty, shaking hand. "Welcome, sir," Obinna stammered. "Welcome to our celebration." The blind man ignored Obinna's outstretched, eager hand. He tapped his cane against the polished marble floor. The sound, echoed like a heavy gavel in court. "I am not here to celebrate," he declared loudly. His voice was deep, commanding, and absolutely terrifying. He turned his head toward Amaka in the center. He walked right past Obinna and the shocked guests. He stopped directly in front of the broken wheelchair. He bowed deeply, bending at a 90-degree angle. "We await your orders, Madam Founder," he announced clearly. The shocking words dropped like a heavy stone. A collective gasp rippled through the massive, silent crowd. Obinna freezes in sheer, absolute, paralyzing terror. Mama Nkechi dropped her expensive crystal champagne glass. It shattered loudly against the hard marble floor. Chioma's knees buckled, and she collapsed entirely. Amaka slowly reached into her filthy uniform pocket. She pulled out a battered, old digital watch. She pressed a single hidden button on the side. The grand doors burst open once again. 10 more elite security agents rushed into the room. They carried a gleaming, high-tech, motorized wheelchair. They gently lifted Amaka from the broken, ruined chair. They placed her onto the luxurious black leather seat. She sat up straight, her posture radiating pure authority. She looked at Obinna, her eyes burning with fire. "The lion only sleeps," Amaka said with absolute clarity. "It does not die." Obinna stammered weakly, his face pale and sweating profusely. "Amaka, what is this? What is happening here?" "I am Apex Global," she declared loudly and proudly. "I wrote the source code you tried to steal. You signed the contract integrating your assets with mine. As of 5 minutes ago, I own everything here. I own this expensive hotel reservation. I own your entire consulting firm. I even own the clothes you are currently wearing." She pointed a steady finger at the terrified man. "Cancel his contracts," she ordered the blind legal director. "Freeze all his accounts instantly without any hesitation. Call the police and arrest him for corporate fraud." Obinna fell heavily to his knees, begging and sobbing. "Please, my lovely wife, forgive me. I love you." Amaka looked at him with absolute cold indifference. "Success reveals character," she whispered softly into the microphone. "It does not change it." The security guards dragged Obinna away in handcuffs. Mama Nkechi wailed on the floor, tearing her clothes. Chioma ran away in absolute, undeniable public shame. Amaka turned her high-tech wheelchair around gracefully. She rolled toward the exit with her loyal director. They left the ruined villains behind them forever. The terrible storm outside had finally cleared completely. The night sky was filled with bright, shining stars. She had reclaimed her dignity and her massive empire. Her disability was not a weakness anymore. It was a symbol of her unbreakable, fierce strength. This story teaches us that true kindness is never wasted. The universe rewards those who give from the heart. It rewards them even when they have nothing left. If you enjoyed this story, please like and subscribe. You will not miss more powerful stories like this.